this MusicLab listening body here at the Griegakademiet at the University of Bergen. My name is Sævigs, and I'm a professor of music technology at the University of Oslo. So that's a bit confusing, but this is a co-production between the University of Bergen and the University of Oslo. Welcome to you here in the hall. Welcome also to those of you following this on YouTube, because we're streaming this event. The event will be both in Norwegian and in English, so we'll switch between the two languages as we go. And there will be parts then, some spoken in Norwegian and some spoken in English. I will switch to Norwegian now. Vi har invitert personer med av gruppen Parkinsons sykdom til å delta i denne unike forskningskonserten for å undersøke hvordan meditasjon og oppmerksom lytting til musikk påvirker kropp og sinne. MusicLab konsertserien vår utforsker musikalske opplevelser med vitenskapelige metoder. Programmet i kveld begynner med en integrert konsertmeditasjonsdel ledet av og Piotr Marcinov. Når det er slutt, vil vi ha en paneldiskusjon med professor Joel Glover og forsker Finn Pappan. Til slutt vil Finn vise noen eksempler på de dataene som samles inn her i dag, basert på en tilsvarende konsert som ble arrangert ved Universitetet i Oslo i forrige uke. Med det så vil jeg gjerne da starte med velkommen til kveldens hovedpersoner, Annabelle og Piotr. Annabelle er pianist og førsteamanuensis her ved Griegakademiet. Hun har Parkinsons sykdom, og har funnet måter å leve godt med denne tilstanden på. Hun er for tiden på turné med forestillingen og spiller med Parkinson, med musikken som veiviser, hvor hun formidler hvordan nysgjerrighet og håp kan endre perspektiver på sykdom og motgang, og viktigheten av å lytte aktivt og med nærvær, både til musikk og til livet selv. God fornøyelse.
Tusen takk, Alexander, og velkommen til dere. Ja, dette blir spennende. Tusen takk for at dere ville komme og stille opp og være med på dette her. Og også takk til våre flinke hjelpere som har hjulpet dere med å få på vest. Så vi skal vente på de aller siste deltakerne til å komme inn, men før vi gjør det, så vil jeg forklare litt hva som vil skje den neste timen. Vi skal over på en sånn panelsamtale klokken 7, men før det, så blir det følgende. Bare finne en plass i denne. Takk for at du har hjulpet med vestene her. Sitter dere bra? Har dere slått av mobiltelefonene? Fint. Ta en dobbeltsjekk på det, for det er så deilig å slutte den lyden. Både lyden av medisin, påminnelsen og andre ting. Så vi har plukket ut ett musikkstykke i dag. Et vidunderlig musikkverk som er over 250 år gammelt. Og det er et mesterverk. Og hvorfor det er et mesterverk, ja, det skal vi kanskje se om vi kan oppdage sammen i løpet av den neste timen. For det er det som kommer til å skje. Jeg kommer til å spille den, uten å si noe på forhånd særlig. Og så skal vi ha en lyttelos gjennomgang. Så vi skal vandre gjennom musikkstykket og oppdage musikken eller tonene innifra, musikken innifra. På min helt spesielle måte, som også kalles for fenomenologi. Fenomenologisk vandring, det ordet kan jeg ikke bare glemme på å uttale. For det har jeg brukt 20 år på det her uttale. Men fenomenologisk metode betyr at vi oppdager hvordan vi erfarer musikken. Og hvordan vi erfarer musikken, det er ofte likt på hvordan vi erfarer livet. Så kompetansen dere har i livet kan dere også bruke til å lytte til musikk. Etterpå så skal vi over i en deilig meditasjon med Piotr. Og Piotr han snakker foreløpig bare engelsk. Han lærer seg norsk, men det tar litt tid i denne alderen, vet dere. Men hvis dere ikke forstår alt han sier på engelsk, så skal dere bare lukke øynene og slappe av og lytte til denne behagelige, myke stemmen han har. Og etter han har meditert oss i 15 minutter, så spiller jeg samme musikkstykke på nytt. Så skal vi se om dere kanskje opplever det på en litt annen måte. Og da skal klokken være 7. Skal vi nå lukke dørene så vi får helt flere, kanskje? Se ser at det ikke er noen andre som skal inn. Hvordan det åpnet, det fint, og hadde rester i påspill. Jeg skal ikke si hva jeg skal spille, det gjør jeg med grunn, for det er noe med at de lytter kanskje litt mer fordomsfritt første gang vi hører et musikkstykke, hvis ikke vi vet hva det er. Men uansett, ta et nytt pust, slapp av, kjenn at dere sitter godt, slapp av i armene, legg penner og papir under stolsetene, og la musikken få lov å få hovedplass. noen som hadde hørt det før? Ja. Det var ikke noen som hadde spilt det før da. Ja, kanskje opp med en hånd. Noen som har spilt musikkstykker før her? Ja. Dette var altså Ludwig van Beethovens nydelige månesynssonat, det første sats, ikke sant? Som egentlig ikke var kalt månesynssonaten. Bare vente litt med disse skjemaene nå. Ja. Nå skal vi bare vie oppmerksomhet til musikken. Og ja, dette med å lytte til musikk. Hva er det som er forskjell på å lytte og høre? Å høre er jo noe vi gjør med disse her utvekstene her. Men å lytte får du det inn i kroppen. Nå gikk du rett i kjernen på prosjektet vårt. Lytter vi med kroppen? Har dere noen gang kjent at dere får gåsehud når dere lytter til musikk? Da har dere lyttet med kroppen. Har dere noen gang fått lyst til å tappe med foten når dere lytter til musikk? Ja. Da lytter dere over kroppen. Før så trodde man at man lyttet bare med dette her over kroppen, herfra opp. Men nå finner man ut at man gjør det veldig mye som skjer i kroppen når vi lytter til musikk. Og ja, vi hører med ørene, men når vi lytter, tenk på det, hvordan vi lytter til et annet menneske, hvordan vi lytter bak ordene, hvordan vi lytter bak tonene. Vi kan lytte med pusten vår, vi kan lytte med følelsene våre. Noen lytter med hodet, og noen lytter med hjertet. Vi lytter med følelser, involverer med følelser. Er det noen som har lyttet til musikk med sine minner? Ja. Det kan vekke gamle minner. Var det noen gamle minner som ble vekket av denne musikken her? Flere som liker her. Ikke det nydelig? Det kan være veldig forskjellig, sant? Ja. Ulike minner, ulike tider, så vi kan ta tilbake til. Og så kan vi lytte med hele vår livserfaring. Og min teori her er jo at vi er eksperter på oss selv. Og da er vi også eksperter på lytting, på lytte til musikk. Og det vi skal gjøre nå de neste 20 minuttene, vi skal oppdage hvordan musikken henger sammen med oss som mennesker. For hva er det i vår kropp som minner om musikk? Noe som gjør at vi alltid vet at vi er levende når vi åpner om morgenen. Vi trekker pusten, og så slipper vi den ut igjen, sant? Og denne formen som pusten har, det er innpust, vendepunkt og utpust. Og vendepunkt. Kjenn litt på det i kroppen først nå. Kjenn at dere sitter godt, og så fyller dere lungene med luft. Og så er det vendepunkt, og så kan dere slippe luften ut igjen, sant? Og der blir vi bevisst på det. Og så snur jo retningen igjen. Så går det inn igjen, og ut. Og hvis jeg nå skulle satt ordene spenning og avspenning på utpust eller innpust, hva vil det oppleves som mest spent? Det å puste ut, eller det å puste inn? Inn, og med noen som mener inn. Jeg tror det var konsensus, altså. Så vi kan si spenning, vendepunkt eller kulminasjonspunkt på avspenning ut. Og dette er bare en metafor. En metafor er et bilde som gjør at vi kan komme nærmere et fenomen som man kan egentlig kalle veldig mange ting. Man kan kalle det for en toveis direksjonalitet. Det har jeg kalt for lenge siden, det høres så komplisert ut. Men selve livet er jo en metafor på den pusten. Vi fødes, da er jo det et innpust, det første vi gjør, sant? Og så kommer skriket. Og så kommer hele livets reise. Og hva er det som skjer når vi endelig får hvile? Da er det et utpust, ikke sant? Og sånn er det med musikk også. En annen metafor er en fjelltur. Der går ut, og der skal opp på en fjelltopp. Og når dere kommer på den fjelltoppen, så får dere et vidunderlig utsyn. Har dere kjent på den følelsen av liksom, dere ble som king of the world? Dere strev der opp til toppen. Og så kommer høydepunktet, og så er det bare, yes! Men så, som i musikken, så skal dere ned igjen på dette høydepunktet. Og dette, kjære venner, dette er kontrakten som Beethoven lager med hver enkelt av dere når han begynner sine første toner. klatrer, og der vi oppdager ting, der en stein, og der har en kanin, og tar vi en så liten rast, og så plutselig går vi ned i en dal. Men vi vet samtidig at vi skal opp. Vi skal opp. Og hvordan kjennes det i kroppen når man skal opp? Spent, noen som sa. Tungt. Det jobbes litt, sant? Vi skal opp, det er en retning, det er en intensjon av vi vet hvor vi skal. Men når vi skal ned igjen, samme veien, så ser vi jo den samme steinen, den samme kaninen. Ja, kanskje det var bordet da, men hva er det som er annerledes? Hva er det som er annerledes når vi går nedover? Det er lettere, selv om noten er make. Og hva annet er annerledes? Det er lettere å gå, strømmen er raskere. Vi er også annerledes. Når vi ser den samme bekken, den samme blomsten, så er vi en time eldre. Vi er en erfaring likere. Vi har vært på toppen. Og dette er kontrakten som, vet du hva man sier, kom vi med. Og dette musikkstykket, kan man vel høre det på overflaten, der hører det er veldig fint og behagelig, ikke sant? Det er liksom, dette kjenner vi igjen. Dette har jeg hørt så mange ganger at jeg trenger ikke å lytte. Jeg kan jo bare lukke øynene og tenke på hva jeg skal spise til middag i morgen, for det er jo så behagelig, sant? Nå skal vi se om vi kan la oss rive med og la oss inngå denne kontrakten med Beethoven, jeg må si Piotr, men Beethoven, og bli nemlig aktiv lyttere. For det er jo i musikk, det er jo i oss musikken skjer. Ikke her, ikke disse lydene her. Men når vi setter lydene, tonene i sammenheng. Så det første som skjer de 4 første delene her. Først har vi en akkord, som gjentar seg mange ganger, sant? Dette er melodi forresten. Nei, melodi er jo gjerne det vi forbinder med noe man kan synge. Sånn som har en form og som er samba. Så vet du, man gjentar en figur og setter oss på en måte inn i nesten sånn transelignende mønster. Men likevel reiser det oppover. Oi, mer spent. Mer. Og så høydepunktet. Og så tilbake igjen. Bare den lille delen der, det er liksom en mikrokosmos av hele stykket. Tenk på det. Nå har jeg reist ut, og den intensjonen, der ligger veldig mye, synes jeg, om musikkopplevelsen. Det er når man vekker sitt eget dopaminlager, det er det som man har på laget, som får en til å liksom få den der lille chill i nakken. Bare å være med på den intensjonen. Så nå vil jeg skal forsøke å joine meg på den der lille turen her. Så vi puster inn. Ok, da skal vi slippe å puste inn hele veien, men metaforen blir pust, sånn. Vær med. Og så kulminerer det. Og så går det tilbake igjen. Det må vi vite. Så. Oi. Hva er det Beethoven gjør her? Plutselig kommer det en liten sånn fanfare, sånn bam, bam. Hvor mange ganger hørte dere den fanfaren i stykket? Ikke så lett å svare på, men kommer det flere enn en gang, tror dere? Ja. Det er ganske viktig det motivet der. Første gang så kommer det. Og andre gang. Kan du høre hvor forskjellig tonen blir? Det er jo samme tone. Bam, bam, bam. Men det som ligger under overflaten, det er jo det som er spennende. Så, hva skal den bli, den tonen der? Og så mild kan den bli sammen med den akkorden der. Så hører dere hvordan akkordene hjelper melodien til å enten være spent eller avspent. For det er de 2 metaforene vi skal ha med oss inn. Det her, hvor er det åpner det seg, eller lukker det seg? Er det spent, eller er det avspent? reisen. Nå har vi kommet et godt stykke på, I hvert fall, opp fjellsiden, tenker jeg.
fysiologisk, men kjenn på den. Bam, 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 avspenning. Bam, 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 bam,
Og de har funnet ut at dette her med å komme hjem i grunntonen, det noe som spedbarn allerede kan føle. Det så grunnleggende i oss. Denne her senteret som trekker oss hjem igjen. Det ganske fascinerende. Så når dere kjenner disse her utpustene, så vær med i musikken, sant? Så nå vet man altså tatt oss med på nå vi jo kommet ganske nær toppen, og nå begynner ting å skje her. Nå skal vi opp til det highest peak, men dette jo et veldig stilig stykke som ikke har disse store utslagene som vi ofte finner i symfonien hans og sånn. Så alt foregår på veldig sånn under overflaten. Så nå skal jeg være litt nerdete her, men hør på dette partiet her. Han sier, ok, den bassen her, på et eller annet tidspunkt, så skal han få lov å komme hjem. Heter det det? Ja. Men han kommer til å bruke innmari lang tid på det. Og imellom, så kommer han til å gjøre noe fascinerende. Og det at han kommer til å bygge spenningen på en helt spesiell måte. Puls og rytme har også spenning, en slags naturlig spenning i seg. Hvis man markerer eneren hele tiden, bam, 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 så det ganske lite spenning i rytmen. Med en gang Michael Jackson fant ut at han skulle lage mer spenning i rytmen sin, ville gjøre bam, 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 så det 1, 2, 1, 2. Det å markere toeren i stedet for eneren, så var 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Merker dere det? Begynner å rygge litt annerledes. Vet du hva her? Han leker med dette. Han sier 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Og så sier han 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 4, 1, 2, 3. Og han trekker liksom i denne her pulsfølelsen. Hør på det her. Han sparer eneren, han sparer godbiten til toppen av fjellet. Og dette et veldig viktig øyeblikk, folkens. Så nå følg meg på dette her. 1, 2, 3, 4. Legg merke til hvordan han markerer treerne. 1, 2, 3, 4. Og dette gjør dette stykket til sånn, tror jeg, et sånt ufattelig mesterverk. Og nå tenker Beethoven, ok, hvordan skal vi ta denne her gjengen, så jeg har lovet noe her nå, hvordan skal vi ta denne hjem igjen? Sånn at dere virkelig kjenner at dere kan hvile. Jo, la oss oppsummere litt hva som har skjedd her. Hør hvor disse akkordene er en slags sånn forsoning med det som har vært. Så sier jeg, ja, det er ok. Vi blir jo aldri helt enige hvem som hadde skyld i den krangelen der, og så sier du beklager det, altså det som skjedde den gangen på fotballbanen, det var en misforståelse, jeg mente ikke å... Og så tar jeg opp en gammel spenning, en gammel konflikt i lys av tiden, og i lysen av ens egen erfaring, og så bringer jeg det opp igjen, og så er det ikke like betent og like spent. Men i og med at jeg tar det opp igjen, tar det på nytt, så får det lov til å løse seg opp. Og det er noe av det mest fantastiske med dette verket her. Det er denne her, vi tar det opp igjen. Det må få lov å løse seg opp som en naturlig ting på slutten, før vi kan virkelig kjenne at musikken slutter. Jeg tror det er det Beethoven prøver litt på her. Han prøver å finne, hva er det i verket her som ikke ble helt fullført, som ikke ble helt... Fikk ikke helt lov å spille seg ut. Sånn at det er fortsatt litt sånn restspenning når vi kommer her. Men gjennom det å lage denne sammensmeltningen, så kan vi kanskje oppleve det som er så nydelig med å lytte til et musikkverk, at slutten holder Det er begynnelsen lovet. En slags ettertanke, ja. Og hvor skjer denne ettertanken? Nå har jo den skjedd i deg, og i deg, og i deg. Og det er jo det som er den aktive lyttekomponenten som gjør at vi kanskje kan få enda mer musikken til å komme inn under huden, forløse dopaminen for oss som trenger det som er Parkinson. Hvis musikken bare går på utsiden, så skjer jo ikke den her tingelingen, liksom. Ja, så det var min gjennomgang. Så det som vil skje nå, det er at Pjotr tar over, og så får det en sånn god avspenning som gjør at kanskje ikke det tenker så mye på alt det jeg har sagt, og så vil jeg spille stykket en gang til. Og så ser vi om det kan bli annerledes andre gang.
Okay, can you hear me? Fantastic. So now we have meditation. So it's very helpful to sit with this straight back. Very helpful. If you want, you can close your eyes. Now, sitting quietly, allow your mind rest in your body. Feel the contact between your body and the chair. Now pay attention to the contact between your skin and clothes, dress, shirt, whatever you have. Now look inside your body. What do you feel? Is there any tension? Impressions? Maybe energies? Whatever it is, just notice it. Now, look at your mind, how it is. It can be excited, happy or sad. Whatever it is, it's okay. Just notice it. Now look at your breath. Don't try to concentrate at any particular place. It might be helpful to look at it from some distance. Don't control it. If you look at it from some distance, it will come to you. It is always with you. Just let it be. And as you look at it from distance, you can see your whole breath. As it comes and goes. Naturally. You can think of your breath as the dear friend. You don't have to control it. Look, your breath is like ocean. It has waves. They are coming and going. And there is something special about them. We quite often go to sea just to watch them. They are coming and going. So peaceful. So natural. Sooner or later, some thoughts, ideas, emotions will come to you. Your mind will take you for the ride. And that's okay. That's normal. This is what the mind does. So, without any frustration, just allow your breath embrace these ideas, thoughts, emotions. Allow your breath to embrace it, to rock it, to calm it. It's okay. After some time, you might notice that breath is not something what just happened in your lungs. It's happening in your whole body. From your toes to the tip of your head. Your breath embraces your whole body. your breath embrace your whole body, you might become one with your breath. Breath in, breath out. Just it.
opplevde musikken på en annen måte andre ganger? Og så kan jeg forklare forskjellen.
Det er dypere på en måte.
Musikken blir dypere? Ja.
Ja, det er en helt annen opplevelse. Du følte det sånn, du var med. Du
følte deg mer med i musikken? Ok. Hva skjedde med tankene dine? Var det mer eller mindre andre gang?
Er det mer tanker? Du føler at du er effektiv.
Andre gang?
Ja, du er med å tråkke stien.
Du tråkket med stien, så du var på en måte i et musikalsk langslag, men du var med å gå selv?
Ja.
Fint beskrevet. Andre erfaringer? Var musikken annerledes andre gang? Ja? Du fikk lyst til å danse. Du var med i musikken. Det ser jo danser, så var det deilig. Flott. Opplevde du at musikken ble du roligere i kroppen når du lyttet andre gang, eller var det mer uro i kroppen? Hva tenker du? Mer ro andre gang. Ja. Det opplevde du faktisk i Oslo, så var det 2 stykker som sa at de hadde mye tremor først når de kom, og når de hadde hørt musikken en annen gang, så var de helt stille i hendene. Interessant. Andre erfaringer, ja?
Jeg gråt første gang på grunn av minner.
Du fikk minner første gang, ja?
Men andre gangen var veldig annerledes. Da følte jeg noe mer i musikken.
Så nydelig. Det korresponderer. Ja, første gang sier hun at da var hun mye mer i minnene sine, andre gang var hun mye mer i musikken. Det har jeg hørt mange rapportere at første gang er det på en måte, da kommer jo alt opp, ikke sant? Og da er det en selv og en egne minner og følelser som er i spill. Mens den er mer renere når vi på en måte lar musikken få lov å ta hovedsetet da. Interessant. Men det kan være, det er ikke en fasit, sant? Så hvordan er det noen andre erfaringer som er kanskje helt annerledes, så er vi hjertelig velkommen til å dele det. Ja?
Hvordan jeg erfarte at musikken lever i kroppen min, og spesielt i pusten, at jeg liksom var med opp, og sånn at jeg kunne ikke takke pusten før.
Nydelig, ja.
Et eller annet sånt.
Var det begge gangene jeg spilte det?
Nei.
Det var sikkert. Det er helt unikt å få sånne tilbakemeldinger, altså at det kan være så forskjellig å høre samme stykke 2 ganger. Ja?
Ja, men vi fortalte den turen vi har vært på, før av musikken. Og siste gang så hadde jeg en historie, liksom jeg var med på den, og så jeg satt nesten ned sånn på slutten, og jeg tenkte at gå tilbake igjen.
Du kjente det fysisk at du var tilbake igjen?
Ja. Og nå har jeg vært litt på en tur og gått og så kommer du ned på nesten utvidet.
Så det jeg ser på det, du har lyttet med hele kroppen, du?
Ja.
Wow! Hørte dere det, forskere? Fantastisk. Ja, men det er du som gikk turen, det var du som vandret gjennom musikken sammen med tonen. Ja, absolutt ting. Nydelig. Ja?
Ja, den var så den siste
Ja, du ble mer søvnig siste gang jeg spilte stykket. Ja. Du lyppet litt, ja. Men det er noen ganger så sovner man til musikk også. Kanskje det var veldig avspenning, så. Det er jo... Ja. Så var det 2 forskjellige stykker? Det er interessant, for kanskje du opplevde det så forskjellig, men faktisk, det var akkurat samme stykke første gang og andre gang. Og det har jo bare med at du opplever det veldig forskjellig fra gang til gang. Du vil ikke gjette på at det var samme stykke. Interessant. Men jeg forstår det. Fordi det kan oppleves veldig forskjellig når man blir introdusert til et stykke som man kanskje ikke har hørt før. Så plutselig er man litt mer kjent med det, og så kjenner man igjen. Vi ser jo det i hjernen, at det man kjenner igjen, det skaper disse her frysningene, eller dopaminutløsningene. Man kjenner igjen noen ting. et refreng hvor jeg kjemper i da slutter det. Så det kan være, ja, muligens. Interessant.
Da er det plutselig litt i slik at føttene blir holdt.
Føttene dine har takten, ja.
Du spiller trommer til vanlig.
Du spiller trommer til vanlig. Var det første eller andre gangen spilte stykket? Nei, andre gangen da begynte kroppen å ha lyst til å være med. Beina begynte å jobbe. Nydelig. Ja. Og det skal vi nå se litt på. Nå skal vi invitere forskerne opp på podiet her. Nå skal vi ha en liten samtale om det som faktisk har skjedd. Og jeg tror kanskje at dere skal få utdelt noen skjemaer først. Stemmer ikke det? Så langt i programmet så vil jeg takke for oppmerksomheten. Jeg håper dere blir værende til ved slutt.
It's not muted, so you use
A little bit extra time perhaps to fill out
Both sides.
both sides on the form.
Så da må gjerne fylle ut begge sidene på skjemaet mens ja, vi snakker.
So we will do this conversation in English because we some on the panel are more comfortable with English than Norwegian. But we're also very happy to take some questions afterwards and discuss in Norwegian as well, if there are some questions. So, as we said, this is a research concert. It's part of this MusicLab series, and one of the things is that we want to try to understand more about musical experiences as they unfold in the real world. And in this particular case, we are then particularly interested in Parkinson's. So we are studying the body in many ways, otherwise as well, but today's topic is then Parkinson's. And then, to start off this conversation, I thought that we should just get a little bit of a quick introduction to what Parkinson's actually is. And then we have an expert with us, Professor Gunnar from the University of Oslo, who's a biologist by training, who's also a musician, and an expert also on different types of, basically on the brain, and how the brain is also working with the body. So Joe, could you start by briefly kind of introducing the topic of Parkinson's to us?
Yes, I'll first say that I do a lot of research on how the brain controls movement, and of course that's something that is perturbed in Parkinson's. I'm also married to a neurologist who treats Parkinson's patients and other patients with movement disorders, so together with her I'm very interested in what goes wrong in the brain in such diseases as Parkinson's. And in Parkinson's, as you all know, one of the things that goes wrong is the control of movement. Parkinson's, of course, is more complex than that. It's not just about movement. There are other types of symptoms that can arise, including cognitive symptoms and emotional symptoms, and I'm sure many of you are Parkinson's patients and relatives of Parkinson's patients are familiar with that. And I think it's also important to emphasize right off at the beginning that the symptoms that Parkinson's patients experience can vary quite a bit. And I think most neurologists would agree that with the statement that every Parkinson's patient is unique. So the way the symptoms appear and manifest themselves differs from individual to individual. That being said, if we look at what happens in the brain in Parkinson's with respect to movement, which is what I know most about, in our brains we have two very important circuits, sets of nerve cells, and one of those circuits is involved in starting movements, and especially movements that we want to make, intended movements. And the other circuit is involved in preventing unintended movements. So in Parkinson's, the circuit that is involved in starting intended movements is not working properly. And in other diseases like Huntington's disease or dystonias, you have the opposite. Instead of having a difficulty in starting movement, you have a difficulty in preventing unintended movements. So you have movements that you don't want to make. These two systems, the one that helps start intended movements and the one that helps prevent unintended movements, these are always in balance and coordinated normally. So whenever we move, the one circuit is promoting the movements we want to make, and the other is making sure we don't make unintended movements at the same time. And the problem in Parkinson's is that this balance is disrupted. And it's now, instead of having a well-coordinated balance, you have not enough of the circuit that starts movements and too much of the circuit that prevents movements. So you have difficulty producing movement. And that all boils down to dopamine, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Those of you who have Parkinson's are probably taking medications that have to do with trying to increase the amount of dopamine in the brain. Without enough dopamine, this balance is disrupted, and that's what leads to the dopamine starting movements.
Thank you. That's a very good starting point for then moving over to you, Annabelle, because Joel and I, we had already started discussing about Parkinson's and music and movement before we got to know you. But then by accident or coincidence, we suddenly we met with you, and this event that we have here today, and also the Oslo event we had last week, came out of this. And could you say a little bit about, because this is something, I mean, the concept you're doing this on a regular basis. I mean, this is part of also your practice, but usually not without the cameras and without the vests and without these things. So can you say a little bit about your interest in also going into research in relation to this concert series that we have here now today?
Yes, because as you mentioned earlier, yes, I have Parkinson's myself, and even though you may not see it, I'm highly affected, especially cognitively. I don't have so much motoric. I have some cramps in my hands and my feet, and I can drag the foot if I'm really tired, but I have no tremors. But the cognitive thing is like I get really neurological fatigue and tiredness, and I can lose my speech when I have too many students one day. But I discovered that how quickly you can kind of switch, so you get dopamine, not from the medication. The medication is overrated, isn't it? It gives you a certain lift. But the true dopamine, the really high kicks, I get from this black machine there. When I play, or when I listen, and when I get really involved in music. And I was thinking, what is going on? Because I can go to the concert at the Griegakademiet, and I'd be really low in the evening, and I come out from there, and I'm bursting. You know, I can run home. I live in Bergen, so what is going on? So I was thinking, is there some way that the brain actually can activate or support this poor part of the brain that has so little dopamine? Or is this something that to do with the neuroplasticity, or it's like, does the brain have a backup system?
Well, Carol, that just makes for an answer.
Big question.
Well, it's a very interesting phenomenon, and dopamine does other things than control movement. It's also, as many people know, involved in, it's the reward transmitter in the brain. Whenever we do something that is rewarding, we get a burst of dopamine. And it's unclear still how those two different functions overlap, but there is overlap among them, between them. And there are different sources of dopamine in the brain. And it could well be that doing something like playing music that's very rewarding to you could influence, bring in reserve dopamine that the brain still has to work with. But it's quite unclear exactly how that works, and that's one of the reasons we are studying this, is we want to find out more about, for example, what does music do in the brain, and can it in fact be used as a potential therapy for Parkinson's?
Because if I can comment on that, we have all felt the dopamine when we take a chocolate, yeah? But this dopamine is just like lasting very, very short. Only the moment when you eat it, and afterwards you feel a little bit guilty. So it doesn't last so long. But with music, and with sauna, for example, and ice bathing, it can last for 2 days. It's amazing. So I mean, it's a potential there.
Yeah.
Let's loop in also Finn Upham, a researcher at RITMO at the University of Oslo, and Finn is an expert on the body and body movement, with also physiological signals and music. And of course, it's interesting what's happening in the brain, but for practical reasons, we don't have the equipment, and it's difficult to put brain imaging equipment on all of you sitting here today. So we have opted for a different solution, which are the vests that many of you are wearing today. And Finn, could you explain what are these vests? What are we actually measuring here today?
All right, well, most of you, if not all of you, are wearing a vest that measures respiration through the stretch of your rib cage. So every time you breathe in, it expands a little. Every time you breathe out, it contracts. And the timing of breathing and the kind of breathing that you perform has a lot to do with how you're feeling and what you're paying attention to, and is also how we prepare for action. And so the relationship between action and understanding and breath timing is very rich and interesting, and so we're learning about some of what you're thinking and feeling through respiratory timing. We're also measuring heart rate, and heart rate can vary for all kinds of reasons. In this kind of experiment that includes meditation, meditation has a very strong effect on heart rate. It becomes more complex and lower, and we'll maybe show some data later that will give an example of that. And so we can see how the how your hearts react to the music versus when you're performing the meditation session. And compare the first time you hear the Beethoven and the second time you hear the Beethoven. It also captures movement. So there's a little accelerometer in the box by your side, and so as your body moves around a little bit or more, we can capture the amount of movement over time, and that also can tell us something about your experience and your condition. Movement is a very complicated thing for people with Parkinson's, and so this is one reason why we think it's interesting to be able to know about the conditions of your Parkinson's in terms of when you're taking medication, what kinds of medication you're on, to be able to contrast that with the people that don't have Parkinson's, to understand some of those interactions as they occur with the music performance. So we can piece apart all of these things to then understand a little bit more about what is happening between music and your experience in a situation like this.
And in addition, we have also have camera sitting up there.
Yes, yeah.
Would you explain that more?
All right, yes, the thermal camera. So when we do audience experiments like this, we use a thermal camera because it doesn't pick up faces. So this is a way to anonymously be able to measure movement across a crowd. So this lets us identify when there's maybe more movement or less movement over time, and look at whether that's coordinated across the group or whether it's very different in one place or another. And what we found in other audiences is that there's some moments in music that make the audience more still, and there's some moments in music that encourage movement. And so this is a way of capturing those dynamics and be able to compare them even to the note-by-note level with the music. Though it takes some time to do that analysis.
And Finn will show something afterwards, actually some data from Oslo, so just wait for that. But before we get to that, then, Annabelle, you have been doing, well, you've been in this particular concert actually once before in Oslo, but you've also been doing similar kind of Lytterlos concerts many times before. And from your experience, the phenomenology of doing this, what is your sense, before we start looking at the data, what is your feeling about how the audience behaves? Because as a performer also on stage, you get a feeling of what's going on, and I guess you also get a sense of how music affects people. So what is your feeling there?
Well, the feeling today was this was a wonderful audience. It was a beautiful audience. And not in the traditional way when you expect people to applaud or anything like that, but what we appreciate as musicians is the commitment as listeners, that we can really feel when you are breathing with us. And I was feeling that second time we were all going through the same journey. Yeah, and the first time it might have been like a little bit, you were coming in and you've been writing these forms and your minds were somewhere else, but the second time it was, and especially after the meditation, we were kind of all in the same journey, and it's a very strong collective feeling of being carried by an audience. It's amazing. So it's a gift for me every time it happens. It doesn't happen every time, but it happened here in Bergen.
And Joel, now you were sitting in the back this time. You were also part of the concert in Oslo last week. And then you haven't analyzed the data, but if you were to speculate a little bit about what would you think that we would find in a data set like this?
So in this data set, I'm particularly interested in the respiration, the breathing part, because breathing is an interesting movement, quite different from heart rate. When your heart beats, you don't really have much control over that. It tends to do what is appropriate. If you run, heart rate goes up. If you sit down for a meal, it goes down. We can't really decide I'm going to lower my heart rate or I'm going to increase my heart rate. But with breathing, most of the time it's automatic. We don't have to think about it. We're just breathing. The brain is controlling that. There's a center in the brain that is driving the muscles that expand the rib cage. But at any time we want, we can start controlling it. So I can start breathing fast or slow. And I can allow something like meditation or music to influence that connection between the outside world and my brain and my breathing. So I'm very interested in how that's going to look, because I think that may be one of the things, probably in addition to actual movement of the body, that we'll see a correlation.
And we will get to see the data. But before we see the data, I would like to open the floor if there are any questions to the panel here. And also feel free to pose a question in Norwegian if you're more comfortable with that, if you want to know something. Yes?
I will comment. Before this session, I talked about medicine. So I was talked with medicine, and medicine works best when technically, and that's what we have a second.
Listening.
So maybe if you ask someone to run low for medicine before this, then you maybe have more effect, because I was caught on both sessions.
We actually discussed this before the first concert in Oslo, because some of you are taking medications rather often, I imagine. Some maybe not so often, but in every case, you know, these medications are, it's an attempt to replicate what the body and the brain is doing normally, which is delivering dopamine at an appropriate rate. And of course, the medication can't do that. It's going to be swinging up and down. And in a more controlled experiment, we might actually decide, okay, everybody's going to take the medication now, and then we're going to play the music and time it like that, but that was too difficult. But we did ask about.
Yeah, it's one of the, so our compromise, because we weren't going to tell you when you could take your medication, that's for you to decide. But we are asking when you last took medication and when you're next taking medication, and we'll look at that to see whether that timing, where you are in that cycle, whether that interacts with some of the phenomena that we're looking at. And we won't be able to know the exact story, but if we do see a pattern based off of what we get across all our participants, then that would be a reason to go on to a more controlled study. So this is like step one, and we are thinking about that, and it's a very valuable comment.
So for me, it must listen.
Interesting comment. Yeah. Yes?
Med musikken og Parkinson, så vi har oppdaget det helt tilfeldig for en lille år siden, for en 4-5 år siden, at musikk gjorde meg veldig godt. Så fikk jeg lyst til å danse. Så opp gjennom årene så har jeg nesten, det var på flere ganger i uken, danset for meg selv, hjemme, sett på tango, ball, alt sånt. Og på bevegelse i kroppen. Så til og med gått hjemmefra som hadde appell danset meg gjennom byen bare tango. Og folk hva er det her for noe? Jeg tenner meg ikke her i grad, så jeg gjør det i grad. Men man føles nå at det er lettere å gå.
Yeah. Well, that's a great comment or question. I would say, before I turn it to Joel to talk about the Parkinson part of this, I would say that I've been studying music and movement and dancing for a long time without thinking about Parkinson. So I always say that people should dance more. They should also make more music, and it's healthy for you in a way, in general, I would say. But Joel, perhaps you can comment on this from a Parkinson perspective.
Yeah, and this is in fact the reason I'm interested in music and Parkinson's, is that sort of effect that you see. And again, we don't know enough about this yet to understand it. It's probably something that's happening on several levels, both in terms of the rhythm in the music sort of affecting the movement circuits that I was talking about, because they are going to be generating rhythm as well. So there could be a sort of entrainment for the music assists those circuits in operating. But it could also be at the emotional level, because often what people experience is that music with a particular appeal is even more effective than just listening to any kind of music. And whether it's probably not purely just a dopamine rush, it's probably a combination of a dopamine rush, whatever dopamine is left is mobilized, but also a more direct influence of music on the movement center. So this is something that we really want to delve into, use brain imaging of different types to sort of find out what's happening.
No, that's exactly what we're trying to understand more about here. So thank you very much for being part of this, I mean, in terms of giving us more data to work on it. Let's do one more question from the back there.
Ja, hej. Jeg lurer på, er der et bevidst valg av det stykket som folk kjenner til, eller hadde det fått større signifikant forskjell hvis det hadde vært likt for alle, at ingen hadde hørt det før, og hadde da fått gjort seg gjennom det, og så tatt det etterpå?
Well, Annabelle, do you want to explain why the reasoning for this piece first?
Skal jeg si det på norsk?
Let's do it in English.
In English, yeah. We did discuss if you're going to have a piece that might not be familiar for everybody, or a piece that probably would be familiar with for everybody. But you can never say, you can never tell if a piece is familiar or not. So you might have a bigger chance that everybody knows this piece than if you pick something that is unfamiliar, and then it will be very much more variations. So we chose to focus on this piece, well-known piece, and see if the experience would be different from first time and second time. That was a conscious choice, yes.
Talking about time, I think we need to move on now, because we would like to have the data jockeying with Finn, and then we also need to also collect your papers as well. So perhaps if you have filled out the papers, perhaps the helpers can collect them here while Finn is setting up for the data jockeying. And then I would like to thank the panel for the discussion here. And again say that we will be around afterwards as well. So if there are more questions, we're happy to answer also questions afterwards. But then let's turn it over to Finn to show some data from last week. Thanks to the panel.
juice if you love some juice. But I'll talk a bit through some of the measurements that we have thus far on looking at this type of data. So as explained before, this is the vest that many of you are wearing, and it tracks 3 different kinds of information. We have body motion. These are excerpts, just 5 seconds from a violinist, and this is the violinist sitting there on stage not doing anything, and so the body motion is very low. And the respiration is nice and deep and kind of smooth. And the heart rate is also relatively low. And then when the violinist is playing, there's a lot of movement because you have to move to play. And the respiration is a lot more complicated because the respiration is involved in how they're moving. And their heart rate is a lot higher. And then this is a moment where it's just after a piece of music. It's 5 seconds during the applause after a performance. And so the violinist is not moving a lot. But you see this big exhalation as they release the effort of the performance, and heart rate begins to go down after that. So we see these trajectories with these kinds of vest measurements. Now, at last week's concert, this is everybody's breathing during that first performance of Beethoven. So down here we see, this is like a transcription of the music. The notes go up and down in frequency. And you might notice this big, carefully, this line going up and then coming down again. That's that focus point, that transition that I'm going to devote a fair bit. And here, each line is one person breathing. So we have people without Parkinson's above in gray, and then we have people with Parkinson's in green, and then we have the pianist and the guide, meditation guide in blue. So you'll see, for the most part, there's just these little waves, wave, wave, wave. And that's typical for how people breathe when they listen to music. So this is an excerpt from another concert, and we see this sort of regularity as the music is played, in this case, Nimrod's Elgar. This is performed by the Fourth Orchestra, and it's very regular, and then at some point there's a disruption. There's a big breath that happens at some point, and then it kind of gets regular again, and that's very typical. So we normally, when we're listening to music, our breathing gets a little bit more shallow and a little bit more regular, but there are moments that kind of knock us out of that consistency. And a moment where that often gets changed is when people applaud. So this is the moment where the audience was applauding, and you see this very funny big breaths that are happening at the same time. This is another participant that shows a very similar pattern. So the breathing gets more regular and very stable, and then it gets disrupted kind of around the same part of the music, and has a really big breath during the applause. These disruptions in quiet breathing, this is when breathing is mostly controlled by the brainstem, so it's involuntary respiration. But what we see in musicians when they play or when they listen is that their breathing often reflects how they would be playing. So they won't breathe the same way, but this is a respiration from a tuba player who is listening to an orchestra play. And the timing of this person's breathing aligned with when they would really need to take a breath. So it's not that they would continuously breathe the same way, but this is actually one of my favorite examples. This is a moment where they kind of took this really rapid sniff, and it's a moment where brass players need to sneak in a breath suddenly before the line changes. And so this person, without thinking about it, is breathing in a way that is related to what the music is and how they would be engaged with the music if they were performing. Now, most audience members don't have that relationship to music, and so what we see is very consistent quiet breathing, this sort of shallow sort of bumps. But then when we get to applause, as I mentioned before, we often get this big augmented breath. So an augmented breath is like a sigh or another kind of sort of just rapid inhalation, and that's something we do all the time, every few times an hour. But it often happens when you kind of change focus or change mode. So what this shows is that this audience was very attentive to the performance, and then when they get the chance to applaud, they kind of change mode and can relax that control as opposed to being so focused, and that's reflected in change in breathing. But if people aren't just listening, what is happening to the respiration? So in the Oslo concert that was parallel to this, we also recorded breathing during the meditation. And here we see it's much more complicated, all kinds of different shapes of waves. And that's because when people are meditating, they expand their breathing patterns, they breathe more deeply, they breathe more rarely. Sometimes they're breathing with people around them, sometimes they're breathing on their own, but there's a shift of respiratory pattern that creates this complexity. And it's still fairly regular, but the shapes of breath are a lot more spiky and varied than what we saw when people are just listening to music. And what's funny and interesting, and maybe to be expected, is that we saw a lot of this complexity in the breathing of participants during the second Beethoven performance as well. So the first Beethoven performance, the first piece when it was performed in the Oslo concert, was like how we often see people breathe during sort of classical concerts generally. And the second one, after the meditation session, we see a very, it's not everybody breathing the same way, but lots of people are breathing in a more sort of complex and full and deep way during that listening. And if we focus on just sort of the average respiratory rate per segment, we see that for the non-Parkinson's participants, we had a relatively high respiration rate, and then during the meditation, it's much lower. So it goes from about around, on average, 18 breaths per minute, down to about 11 breaths per minute. And then during the second Beethoven session, it's a little bit higher than the meditation, but it's still a lot lower than the first Beethoven. And we see the same pattern in the Parkinson's participants. So initially a relatively high respiration rate, and then a lower one during the meditation, and then a little bit higher again, but still lower than the first time for the second time the Beethoven happens. Now we could consider this to be a sign that everybody was thinking so hard about their breathing. But what we find instead, according to the survey responses, is that people experienced, for the most part, more stable attention. And so even though their breathing had changed character, this was also serving their engagement with the music. So it wasn't that they were just paying attention to breathing. It's that something about this process and the guiding shifted for many people and supported a sustained focus and also a greater calm. Now the participants that had Parkinson's in that first set also reported, for the most part, better internal timing and sense of rhythm, increased fluidity, and also more coherence through that second listening, which are all these qualities that Annabelle is trying to promote with this kind of practice. Now, when we look at audience movement, here we're using thermal measurements. This is an example from another study. What we often find is this is measurements where we've looked at little pockets of the audience to get a kind of texture of movement over time. So what this is for one audience, another audience, and a third audience, all to the same piece of music by the same orchestra. Typically what we see is that there's more movement in the crowd at the beginning of a piece, and then after about 20 seconds it kind of settles down. But then there can be things that happen that provoke more movement. So in this case, all three listenings showed an increase again, this is their averages, an increase again of movement across all three audiences. At this moment when, this is a piece of Strauss, where the orchestra starts to sing. And so part of this is a surprise reaction that we see across a crowd when we do these kinds of measurements. We also see dips in movements together. So in another concert, we used accelerometers kind of similar to what you're wearing now, and found that the audience on average decreased movement at specific moments of the music. So these are moments when the music gets quiet, and when the music gets a little bit more sort of thin in the texture. And often what people are doing is, because you understand music and you're predicting where to go, you will adjust your behavior to let those moments, flourish in all their glory without any sort of noise. And so often people will reduce their movements, even their little sort of small movements, at these moments of the music. And this stilling pattern then is what we often expect for a classical concert to be more common. So as opposed to music that makes you groove, there's also music that makes you still. And this pattern of being more still at specific moments is a way in which we're kind of cooperating together with the performers to create the atmosphere, to have a good shared musical experience. Now, looking at the movement across the first and second Beethoven performance, we actually didn't see a big difference in that group between the Parkinson's and non-Parkinson's participants. And this shows the average, or sorry, the median motion. In blue is the Parkinson's patients, and in orange is the non-Parkinson's patients. But there's one point that seems kind of different, even at this scale, and that is actually this moment where we have this turn. So as the texture thins, and the melody is going higher and higher, this is how it goes up, and then it starts turning around again just after 150. In the first Beethoven performance in Oslo, the crowd reacted, both non-Parkinson's and Parkinson's participants, the crowd reacted by moving less in this moment. So the reaction to this moment involved the same kind of sort of restriction of motion. But what we found the second time round is that there was actually a burst of movement in reaction to this that might have to do with people recognizing the moment, maybe experiencing chills. We don't quite know what's going on, but rather than containing themselves more, there was a shift towards a little bit more movement across the group, particularly across the Parkinson's group, which may reflect a different relationship to this kind of moment. Now, this is a very quick analysis. This is the first thing I kind of noticed looking at these time series. But we'll be looking much finer detail now going forward, both for this concert's measurements and your measurements against the music that was performed. I'm not going to talk about heart rate, but this is just the measurements of heart rate per beat, so beat by beat, varying a little bit. This is again every single person that was in the other concert. And one of the things that's striking and expected, is that this is the meditation section of the concert, and we see much wider variation in heart rate. This is what I mentioned at the panel. And we see that width happening and continuing for many people into that second performance. So that's an increase in heart rate variability. And we'll be looking into also that in relationship to how this contrasts to the heart rates of participants during the first Beethoven, which is the yellow section here. So there's still a lot to study. This is just what we managed in the few days that we've had since the last concert. But we will be learning a great deal from all of your measurements. So thank you so much for helping us learn more with your contributions. And yes, please remember to return your bests before you go home. Otherwise, we won't get your data. All right.
Thank you, Finn. Let's give Finn. We will conclude today's program. Thanks again for coming. Please return the papers there and your best outside. And if you have any questions, please approach us and ask them for you. Takk for i dag. God kveld.